Let's compare Bash and PowerShell. We'll start with a comparison of the features qualitatively, just searching and scrolling through the top results. Then we'll move into a quantitative empirical comparison, percentages of usage, impact, things like that. So PowerShell is often used to manage Windows environments at scale. Bash, on the other hand, is more traditionally suited for development environments. I don't know about that. Bash is totally useful for production environments, and in fact, it's more commonly used in production environments. But it is true that PowerShell is often used for Windows environments. Are they the same? PowerShell is a command scripting language. Bash is a command shell and scripting language for the majority of the Linux system. Yeah, that's fine. Bash is nice for simplicity. PowerShell can handle some bigger challenges, but is most useful on Windows. Yeah, I don't know about bigger challenges, but I would say different challenges. Specifically, it does some Windows-specific things. Bash can totally scale. Bash versus PowerShell, what's the difference? They are both command line interpreters and user shells. You can use either of them all day. I don't think you can use either of them all day, but if you go on to read what it says, you can use either of them all day without actually making a Bash or PowerShell script. So that part is true. But this idea that they're sort of co-equal, you can use either of them all day, that is not true, and that's also not what this article says. Bash is privileged in the Mac environment and the Linux environment. Most production systems are in Linux, so you can't just use whatever you want. PowerShell has a more interactive graphical command line interface. So doesn't that mean that it's better? It has a graphical interface. No. So the fact that PowerShell has a graphic command line means that it is heavier, which makes it a worse fit for many production systems. It reduces interoperability. So it's actually not making it better. It's just a trade-off, and it's actually a net loss trade-off in the case of most production systems, which is why most production systems don't use PowerShell. Bash does use text. There are GUI tools to work with Bash, but they are not built into Bash itself. They're external. And that's okay. We keep things modular, and that keeps things lightweight so that the production system, when it's running, can have the minimal logic there. And that's good. That's good for a bunch of reasons. Security, portability, maintainability, modularity. The list goes on and on. Yeah, it treats data as objects. Doesn't that mean PowerShell is better? Like Bash is doing this elementary basic string thing and PowerShell is doing this complex sophisticated object thing. No, again, that actually makes PowerShell more opinionated, less interoperable, heavier weight, and Bash is just simpler and faster and efficient and interoperable. Unless you are doing Windows-specific things and the external system interoperating with PowerShell already has object context, because you're both operating on the Windows operating system level. And in this very niche case, it can improve throughput and efficiency for a small subset of Windows-specific tasks. So that is the naive Bash versus PowerShell search. Let's get into some more opinionated searches. So here, I tried to find the count of issues. So PowerShell is open on GitHub. It's easy to see 3.4K issues. Developers who work with Bash locally on Mac, we are really using Zish these days. That's the modern approach. So we say Bash casually because Zish is the successor to Bash and because historically we used Bash literal. But today we mostly don't use Bash literal, we use Zish. So look at the issue to star ratio. On PowerShell, you have 3.4K issues and about 39K stars, so roughly 10 to 1. On Oh My Zish, you have 160K stars and about 200 issues, so I think that's 800 to 1, which would put the ratio about 80 times better. Bash literal, also called GNU Bash, GNU, is what is used in many Linux boxes in production systems. And on Windows, you will often use Git Bash because Git, when you install it, comes with a flavor of Bash. And programmers on all platforms are using Git for version control as the norm. So when we talk about Bash, we're actually talking about three slightly different things that are all within an ecosystem. There's GNU Bash, Oh My Zish, and Git Bash. So we need to look at the issues for these independently. When we look for GNU Bash, which is the oldest, and this is also Bash literal, if you're speaking technically rather than casually, this is the one that you're talking about. So the bug list is open, but it's hard to grok and it's hard to parse. So here are the archives of the bug bash, and you can see like the latest thread. Does this mean these are all open issues? No, these are just like email conversations, so they still use a mailing list pattern. I can't paste anything special in this crap mail. This is like a performance test, so it's not even like clearly a bug. If you go through and if you add these up, just the outstanding bugs and the forwarded bugs, we're not counting resolved bugs and we're not counting in the other branches, we're south of 500. So there are less than 500 issues here. There are more than oh my zish. So there's more than 200 in this line alone. For the entire Git system, we have 45K stars. By the way, they totally deserve more stars than that. I don't know why oh my zish has more stars than Git. That being said, the issues tab is completely invisible. You don't report issues here. And even if there were some number here, it wouldn't be trustable because that would be for all of Git, including Git bash, which is a small subset. So basically, it is not super transparent how many bugs exist within Git bash. Yeah, and so here we can see the developer survey. We can see pretty clearly apples to apples. Bash is at 30% and PowerShell is at 12%. Again, this number is understated because if you are working with Kubernetes or a Docker environment, you are working in a bash compatible environment, not a PowerShell environment. And many developers are using Docker or Kubernetes. Even if they are not writing bash scripts, they are still in a bash environment. So let's look at Docker usage, for example. You can see it's 63 respondents, and when you hit professional developers, it is the top other tool at rounding to 69 nice %. We can come up with some final results, and we just put an asterisk on it. The asterisk is that bash is not buggy, and PowerShell is buggy. And then the caveat is that we assume some modest precautions. So there's the argument about who has more powerful features. I think we touched on the fact that if you have like a niche Windows-specific use case, there are a couple cool PowerShell features. But if you get out of the weeds, they both include incredibly powerful features. There's this debate about who has more ergonomic and powerful scripting. And there's this idea that bash syntax is really difficult for scripting, which it is. And there's the idea that PowerShell is better than bash in terms of its scripting ergonomics. Maybe that's true. But if you compare them to actual scripting languages, they are both garbage. So what you want to do is use either of these to invoke an actual programming language, like Python or JavaScript. If you are taking that approach, you shouldn't be scripting in these, what I would call DevOps languages, or even DevOps DSLs, or command languages. These should be doing very little logic, and you should fire off a script. So by encouraging scripting in the command language, that is arguably an anti-pattern. So even if you do believe that PowerShell is nicer to script in natively, that could be a trap. So that's not even clearly a good thing. So I would actually argue that bash is truer to an ideal command language. Regardless, the ergonomics of both of them is awful. You don't want to be like programming in either of these. Which is lightweight? Bash is lighter weight. Bash is more interoperable. So PowerShell is favored on the Windows platform. Bash is favored on Linux and Mac. So even just the 2/3 right there, it's already winning. But that really understates the case. When you look at production systems, even more than that are Linux-based. Also, bash is well supported on Windows through Git bash. So bash is well supported on all operating systems. Then when you run into the programming language level that's on top of the operating system level, bash has even better interoperability with our programming languages like Python and so forth. So bash really takes the cake for interoperability and also for prevalence within systems or developer mindshare. I hesitate to call Docker required, but really the reason it is required is because of Git. You are required to use Git. It's true that there are maybe 1% of shops out there that are still using Subversion or Mercurial and they don't use Git, but it's essentially required. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more coding content and share the video with a friend who you think might be interested in programming.